Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to That Trippi Show with my co-host Alex Sashlow. This week, Alex and I keep talking about where do we go from here, but it's not just about elections. I've always been trying to figure out where technology and social media are going, from the Dean campaign all the way up to now. A while back, I read a book called The Hour of the Predator by the Italian essayist Giuliano De Napoli. But and I think an important read. But then I started to ask, okay, well, what the hell are we going to do about this? And then I recently saw an op-ed in the New York Times that really got me thinking. It's called "Big Tech's Predatory Platform Model Doesn't Have to Be Our Future." It turns out Tim Wu wrote it. He has a incredibly good new book out called "The Age of Extraction," and I knew we had to talk to him. Tim, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Alex, where do you want to get going?
Quoting Italian literature in the intro, man, you're really raising the bar for this episode immediately. I think, Tim, let's just go big. Let's start with the big idea. Let's start with the age of extraction itself. How did you get there? And I know, Joe, in pre-show, you had a quote you wanted to tee that up with too, didn't you?
Well, it was something. I've been really kind of watching what Mark Andreessen and people like him are saying out there. And there was a quote, early pages of the book, of your book, that said, where he says, "There is no material problem, whether created by nature or by technology, that cannot be solved by more technology." And it's when you've designed the platform to extract everybody's content, attention, and engagement, to maximize your profits and power, it really rings true. And I'm seeing a lot of that today. And I wondered if that's what you're talking about. I mean, is that attitude part of this age of extraction that you're talking about?
And so I do think we live, as the title suggests, an age of extraction. I think that we face a time where many of what really should be our essential services, sort of public services, whether it's where we speak or where we buy things or whatever they are, the sort of main streets of our time, are private and have perfected business models of just extracting too much wealth, too much assets from the entire economy. And I mean this not just from us as consumers, but like from other businesses, and the rest of us. So that's what I'm concerned about. And I think a political program that wants to restore balance needs to start talking about how we've let basically what market infrastructure, the big platforms of our time, all become these monopolized entities and can just take so much from the economy.
Yeah, yeah. But it's also not just threatening our prosperity, though. I don't know you get into that, but it's also dismantling a lot of the what we need in a society where there's fabric isn't torn apart or shredded. It's wreaking havoc on democracy itself, in governance. Is that something you think you agree with that, or?
No, I completely agree with that. A lot of why I wrote this book was to understand sort of the dream of the internet in the 90s and what it was supposed to bring, and then what happened.
Yeah.
And we were very optimistic when I think about it. You go back to that, and when I was growing up, and I'll admit I bought into it, and I thought it's going to spread democracy everywhere. It's going to make everybody rich. We're going to have these sort of thoughtful discussions on every single topic. And I will say there's some of that. Like, you can get on Reddit, and if you have a really weird hobby, you can meet some other people who have that same hobby and like talk about the best kind of shoelaces or whatever. But unfortunately, I think there was a turning point in the 2010s. The government, and I was part of some of those governments, was way too hands off and thought, tech knows better about everything. A little bit of that Mark Andreessen idea, there's no problem that can't be solved with technology. And we had a birth of, I think, just incredibly toxic business models that have fed off the worst things in our country: division, hatred, fear, and have amplified and profited off them That's the speech part and our sort of public discourse part. And on the economic side, just sucked way too much from the rest of the economy. So I think there was a real failure to take on these issues about 10 years ago. And, we've kind of gotten what we deserve in some sense.
Do you think though that that was like I know there's a turning point, but how much of that do we think looking back with the benefit of hindsight was some of that extractive model kind of always baked in, or was that kind of a shift?
I think there's a definite shift. I mean, it depends where
Yeah.
you want to put the point. But look, these were, I guess, companies that wanted to be profitable. I think there were two real big turning points. One is in the early 2000s, where a set of kind of idealistic companies that presented themselves almost like charities, like Google would do no evil and we serve people first and all this kind of stuff. And I do think they were sort of idealistic. They also decided they were going to become regular, Delaware for-profit corporations that had constant pressure. And if you ever worked at a company, the constant pressure to make more and more money is very
Yeah.
corrupting. Anyway, I go on about that, but I don't necessarily think, I mean, look at a place like Wikipedia, took a very different path. And, Wikipedia may occasionally be stupid or whatever. It doesn't have this problem of sucking money from the economy and, throwing elections or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember that period, and now I look back and think how naive I must have been because we built the Dean campaign on that whole uplifting model that empower
Mhm.
democracy from the bottom up. And we it turned out like we had Dean TV, and the only mistake we made was after the campaign was over, we didn't say, "Hey, we have this thing called YouTube." And go try to make billions of dollars. That wasn't why we were doing it. It was to build that thing now where so many of the tools that we once thought were going to liberate the world are now being turned on the freedom of all of us as we get sort of trapped in these networks and these extractive models that you're talking about that have just sort of taken over. As someone who's been trying to build a network, a decentralized network, so civil network for people to communicate on, it's it's just incredible how addicted people are to the bad platforms that are just using them and extracting every minute they have for the profit of these guys that are designed them to do exactly that. And it's really tough to get people to start thinking, no, we can do something, we can build something new and a better platform.
Yes, I agree. By the way, on the Dean campaign, if I recall correctly, Zephyr Teachout did a lot of your digital work.
Yes, yes, you did.
And her and I ran for office in 2014, and I see her all the time. We're writing an antitrust casebook together. And she's been obviously close to the Mandami people. That's sort of an
Yeah.
aside. But what do we do? I think there was, look, I agree. I think there was a big failure of government in the 2010s. I mean, even the most obvious thing like passing a privacy law. Yes, like any poll of Americans, do you think you could use a little more privacy? I think their answer is always yes. For children, it's probably 95%, 99%, except for maybe Mark Andreessen, the one guy who would vote against vote
Right.
against that. And somehow Congress cannot seem to pass anything on these issues. The Democratic Party is much to blame as the Republican Party, honestly, although both. Yeah, and then the same thing with some set of basic utility-like rules or public callings, common carriage rules for the main platforms. So they have to treat the sellers on them a little better. I mean, they're very obvious moves to my mind. I think these are very powerful. I think it's very hard to build public competitors. It's not impossible. We did build, PBS and NPR in the 60s as a response to the over-commercialization of the regular media, the quiz. Although, in retrospect, the quiz show scandal, where it seems kind
Yeah.
of tame. It's kind of amazing to believe people were outraged. I mean, now the idea that something might be fixed, everyone assumes it's fixed.
Yeah, but if we built our own network, I mean, it's us. It's our content, it's our engagement, it's our, we're there because we want to be with our friends and have those conversations. And we could build our own where people have a better deal. I mean, our own public kind of space where, I call it sort of networks of by and for the people, so the government of by and for the people can like survive all this, because I think it's a real problem. But when Andreessen, like the quote, it just says it all. He posted way back, I think in 2022, that shape rotators build the Skinner boxes that the word cells all live in. And just so translate for everybody out there, shape rotators are the entrepreneurs and engineers, those superior makers of worlds that build the Skinner boxes that word cells is a pejorative for the rest of us, writers, thinkers, citizens. They're trapped in the boxes they designed to maximize their profits. And then so when I saw the book and what you were writing, I was like, man, that you like that. Mark Andreessen is literally admitting, sort of like bragging about exactly what you're talking about. Because the Skinner box, folks, just in case you don't know, was a device in the 1930s and 40s that a small cage that a rat could click on the lever to get food or to avoid electric shock. And it turns out that's what a lot of these networks are designed to do, to keep you pressing on the buttons and keep scrolling so you stay addicted to it and you spend more time on it, and they sell more of your advertising and everything else. So how do we get people out of that mode, though? I mean, or is it do you think it has to be government, like you said, sort of a PBS, or do you think there's a capacity for people to sort of revolt against those kind of algorithmic driven places and start to create our own, much like the early blogosphere? I know you cited Glenn Reynolds in your early blogger, and a good friend from back in the day. That moment, is there a way we can recreate that, or is it just so too far gone?
I think it's a mixture. So on the one hand, I do think there is a growing awareness, and it sort of started with children, of, as you
Mhm.
describe it, the Skinner box-like nature of many of the major business models, especially in social media. Um, they B.F. Skinner was the psychologist who
Yeah,
designed those boxes and operant conditioning. And there is quite something ingenious to the design. They learned from that, not from a lot of other experiments, that variable rewards are very addictive. So have you ever noticed, if you go on to like social media, it's sometimes, it's not always rewarding. Sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's not. That's actually a more addictive pattern than just good times. And I agree, there's a lot of deliberate engineering of addiction. And I think we've started to understand that a little better. So part of it lies with the individual, and and the group and people, or I have young daughters, and the school tries to organize and get pledges not to get them devices. So part of that is a movement, almost a little bit like the environmental movement, or the food movement, rejecting junk content. That's
right.
something. But I do think we're kind of fool ourselves to think that you can stand up to stuff by yourself. And in some level, what the point of government is to gather up people. And
In
there's a
theory,
yeah.
not
I mean, in theory, and if it doesn't, then eventually people take things into their own hand at the longest run, if things become too unbalanced. But government does sort of, in theory, exist to help people collectively. I mean, like, for example, with privacy laws, anti-surveillance laws would be a better word, to limit the amount devices can see on you. And you're not going to negotiate for that yourself. It doesn't hurt yourself, but it hurts yourself when the world around you is better able to manipulate you in subtle ways that you have trouble understanding. Um, it's like, well, it's kind of like we're living in a casino right now.
Yeah.
And then we expect people, oh, we're going to Las Vegas. You walk through a casino, oh, but don't gamble. And of course, people just like, we're weak.
Right.
So I think sometimes the government needs to be on our side.
it does feel though with, especially now, where so much of the power and so much of the wealth is concentrated in the hands of such few people, both in terms of Silicon Valley giants and it feels more like though that it's also this problem with capitalism that we've run into, that the incentives now for both for users. I mean, if you think back to like, I remember how cool it was when I got a Gmail, and
Hmm.
Gmail was free. And I'm for our video people or for our non-video people, I'm doing the bunny ears on it. But like, I feel like there's still this sense of the incentives are wrong, where people still think they're getting things for free because getting something for nothing feels good. But ultimately, like your time on Instagram, for example, just scrolling through the feeds is being monetized. And there isn't that sense of like collective outrage other than what you said with kids. So how do we start moving towards changing some of those incentives?
Yeah, I mean, or changing the awareness of it. I mean, um, I think it has been ingenious of this industry to treat consumers relatively well. Although even that is slightly changing. Google is full of ads. It's kind of hard to use. Amazon is no longer actually cheaper anymore. If I think if you hadn't noticed, it's more or
Right.
less the same price, and like the Prime thing goes up and up. You kind of get like caught in the web, and it's hard to get out. Um, but I think that partially the job is on the affected industries. I mean, the rest of when I think about the revolt against the railroads in the 19th century, sorry to push it back, but the railroads 19th century had extraordinary power, extraordinary wealth. Everyone was afraid of them, and they could do whatever they wanted to any farmer, obviously, because how are they going to fight the railroad? But they almost had a revolution. The Granger movement was close to a second American Revolution. And ultimately, we put in place rules that limit the power of the railroads. I don't know if it's going to take an almost revolution, but I think there are a lot of entities who economically are affected, and not just, consumers. Uh, well, the consumers are affected in terms of advertising and stuff, who need to get their acts together and understand that they're being extracted, kind of bled dry. And you say it's a problem with capitalism. There's different forms of capitalism. We've kind of wandered into a particularly toxic version of it, I feel like. I
Yeah.
like the idea of market systems where a lot of people can get rich. You have distributed money, kind of like the United States, different parts of its history.
Well, it's
We've
what we
moved
wanted the
into,
internet to be too.
yes, that was
Yeah.
the whole dream. The dream of it was to distribute wealth. And I mean, basically, my book is about the corruption of that dream, like, and what
Yeah, because
happened.
it concentrated it all in a few hands, really, a few companies.
In
And
step
now
by
with
step.
and
Yeah,
now with
20 years.
AI, which is something I wanted to get to with you. I mean, it's almost like it's like now the extraction is going deeper and bigger and funneling it in even a smaller group of companies and power centers. How do you see AI as sort of like the logical endpoint of the extractive era? In other words, that maybe causes that revolt or the Granger movement. Is that or or is it the threat that people have different views of AI? So I just wanted to see what it seems to me it's putting gas on the pedal of extraction, but maybe you have a different view.
Um, I think that, yes, although I'd say it a little maybe differently, which is to say, I think the tech platforms that exist to have a really sweet model, which funnels outrageous amounts of economic wealth towards them, see AI, and the reason they invest so hard in it is a form of defense against their own usurpation. Because I think they want to set it up that if anybody wants to challenge them, they have to do their own AI investments and have billions of dollars to do it. So, and they also want to protect themselves against AI startups challenging them. So I think there's a huge investment in AI that is partially a defense mechanism. I think they would love to figure out forms of extraction. I also think, though, we talked earlier about addiction. There's an obvious potential in AI to create forms of emotional reliance, not only
Yeah.
because it makes things easier, but also, some vague sense. I think that is something they're interested in. So basically, I think companies like Facebook and Google, cynically see this as a way to make sure that they're never replaced. They want immortality, and they think it could be the elixir.
I mean, you joke about the immortality thing, but you constantly hear of tech founders trying to figure out how they can, the Theranos, right? Like all that. But so you hear, I want to get to OpenAI for a minute. I did, by the way, what just hit me was I saw an ad this weekend. I think it was during one of the national football games. It was Instagram for teens, and aimed at parents to show that Instagram isn't gonna like cause your teen to bully. It was really fascinating. My wife and I just kind of looked at each other and we're still like, nope. But let's get to OpenAI. Two things. One, they're hiring. They just hired a bunch of Meta's ad team away, so you see where that's going to go soon. But what do you think of the IPO? It's a nonprofit
Um,
going IPO is kind of exactly where we look at some of those incentives going totally awry, right?
I mean, it's a sad repeat of what we've seen, which is an idealistic project that actually gets a lot of goodwill and attracts a lot of scientists and top engineers to a project because they think, all right, I want to improve the world. I want to do something meaningful with my life. And it's Google is basically the same story. And then when push comes to shove, all of a sudden they become part of the financial system. And science was not always this way. Because there's always been companies, companies have made money, but it hasn't really been the way in earlier stages of our history that science was always so closely, I guess, attached to the core of capitalism in this way. Like, you know what I mean? And like they're doing the most advanced AI research, but as opposed to figuring out, I don't know, all the ways that could help humanity, it's being quickly turned into how can we monetize this? And I'm
Yeah.
nervous. And, it's crazy to think how much of our resources go towards trying to figure out ways to trick people to take their money or, extract just little bits of money. We have a big problem. I think this is a long-term problem for the US. And sorry for going on, but I feel like we have moved away from a model where business consists of creating a better product, and maybe charging more for it, towards something where you figure out pain points and you extract as much as you can. You know,
Right.
like flying on airlines reminds me of that. It's the same damn thing. Hasn't changed in years.
Well, but there's also this
Well,
this anti-competitive nature of it, right? Where you're a lot of times you're no longer trying to start a company or an app or a network or whatever for the sake of the network. The incentive is to create value so that you can have an exit event and intentionally get bought. I mean, think of Google buying YouTube or any of the other, but it's almost like anytime one of
well,
them rises up, some of these other big boys have so much money that they're gonna swallow them up.
Well, when I was in the Biden administration, we tried to change that, and tried to change the kind of green light, easy, easy acquisition of your competitors. Because I think it is a huge problem. I think we had some, unfortunately, during the Trump administration, has become a much more pay for play kind of deal where companies can buy whoever they want as long as they then donate to the building of the ballroom or, somehow buy a bunch of
right.
Trump crypto or
We're
something.
calling it the Epstein
Well,
Memorial Ballroom, by
yeah.
the way. It seems to be
That's a good one.
sticking.
Yeah, but I mean,
That's a dog that didn't bark. Yeah.
the internet was supposed to, we all thought this thing was going to connect us and, all of us would be connected and it would bring us together. And that is how it started. That's even how Google started. I mean, in the early days, but then you're right. It basically, all those connections of all of us, instead of, hey, how to connect those people together, how do we, no, it was, how do we digitize, monetize, and weaponize those connections? I mean, that's literally what these companies went to work on. And then it's interesting because if you look at OpenAI, and then again, it's the same thing. That early idea of the internet that Google and all of us were, bloggers were starting out and everything, and how it's immediately or over time became, like I said, digitized, weaponized, and it was us. It was digitizing and monetizing our connections to each other and then weaponizing them, using them to extract profit. It now sounds like in a lot of ways that's OpenAI is already at the forefront of doing that with the IPO, et cetera, in terms of like, oh, wonderful idea, and instead forget about any of the spiritual, cultural stuff that could, that we can, and the things that it could change for all of us, and instead know how do we digitize, how do we monetize it, and further extract from all of us. That's what sort of has happened in a weird way. We are always, in a lot of ways, prisoners in these Skinner boxes. And if AI just is used to like manipulate us even more, and by the way, we also know that all these platforms are putting their finger on the scale, both politically, culturally, and for their profit. What's your way forward? I mean, how do you see? What are the things that need to happen, or that you would, if you look over the horizon, that would have to happen for us to imagine an alternative to all this?
Yeah, I mean, this is partially, in many ways, the project of this book
Right.
is essentially to talk about what we hoped would happen with the internet, then the mistakes we made, and there's a lot. I mean, I mentioned a few of them, but the government whiffed. I think even the founders, we didn't structure things. We let it become entirely extractive, advertising driven, and obsessed with capturing people and creating dependence and extraction. So in the book, I talk about this at some length. Every civilization has had these kind of essential businesses. I mentioned the trains.
Right.
Electricity is still essential. In earlier times, the city marketplace, but the stock market's got. What we do is we have pretty serious rules for how they behave themselves. And we have never said, okay, electricity is essential to everything, therefore they can take as much as they want from every transaction. I mean, that'd be kind of crazy. Electric company, if it could take whatever it wanted, would probably be the most profitable company. They'd be like, all right, give us all your money minus 20%.
Right.
We've let
Right.
these companies just kind of get there. So um, I think I discussed five different ways you can constrain the power of the essential platforms in my book. One of them is kind of like a version of net neutrality, which we platform neutrality, or even more strongly, like utility regulation. Like maybe
Mhm.
Amazon is capped at 30% and not allowed for its marketplace and not allowed to, compete with its own customers and spy on them, and as it does. We strong antitrust action and ongoing campaigns to try to prevent companies from defending themselves by buying up their competitors. There needs to be a limit. There needs to be a line between the AI and the tech platforms so they actually fight against each other. The third one I'd say, the risk going on, is empowering those who bargain with the main platforms. Some of that is union related, but some of that could be like rights holders, like copyright owners or news organizations, being able to get together and say, okay, here's our price. We're going to bargain with you. If you want news, Facebook, you have to bargain with all of us at once, which requires reforms the antitrust law. So I've got to have a program, I think, and part of what I say in the book is, we've kind of let the platforms get out of control based on this dream we had. And now they almost have like main character syndrome. They think they are the economy,
Yep.
but
Right.
we're the economy.
Right.
A lot of people, if you want to talk about building and, a new generation of wanting to build stuff, well, if you want to build, the toll bridges have to take a little less, and you have to, I believe in a lot of builders, not just, okay, what is, Andreessen going to fund, or what is like Google going to do with their money? And I don't know why we've trusted ourselves, our future, to just like three or four people and how they're going to spend their money.
Well, so
So,
we've been, Alex and I, we and a bunch of others have been out there trying to create a new and different network. We'll see. As you know, that's an uphill fight, and working on it. But you've studied this stuff for years, how systems, how they've captured us, our attention, our data, all of it. After all that, what still gives you hope? I mean, that makes you think we can turn this around. Is it that enough people will get it, or that government will get it? I mean, you look at who's in charge right now, in the administration. It's not likely that they're going to take any antitrust action. So, is it all of us organizing, maybe unionizing the net somehow? It's like, what gives you hope that we can turn it?
Yes. So what gives me hope is American history and the fact that the United States has survived periods of being dominated by private interests previously, the progressive era and the basically the progressive era is one example where there was, I mean, if anything, almost worse monopolization of the economy across sectors. Obviously New Deal is another example. Um, and in some ways, the original revolution was a revolution against monopoly power.
Hmm.
So I feel like it's in the American DNA to fight, uh, and I'm not exactly giving you the mechanism, but I think it's in the American DNA to fight against power that has no check and a fight against a sense of unfairness. And I think more and more people feel it, how it comes expressed. I guess, ultimately it's about political movements that change things. One challenge is Trump's, gobbled up a lot of that energy and ran with it, while the Democratic Party was still like fiddling with ideas. And, he sucked up a lot of that energy for his own purposes and his own profit, the kind of anger about the unfairness of the US economy. Um, but I don't think the game is over. I'll tell you what the alternative is, having studied a lot of history. I think that countries that have persistent unfairness and too top heavy, too, much of this Mark Andreessen, like these people are peasants and whatever, they tend to experience revolutions and war. And that is its own equalizing force, not one I recommend. But
Right.
it is, the United States has avoided revolution for over 200 years. It came close a few times, but usually it avoided it by making things a little fairer and rebalancing the economy. So obviously we didn't avoid the Civil War. That's a different topic. But
Right.
yeah, that's what I say. I know it's at a high level of abstraction, but that is the thing that gives me hope is our own history and our own DNA of resisting power.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've been toying with some of my friends is launching Revolt Social. Not a revolt. Not I don't mean necessarily in the idea of Trump, part of that, obviously, but no, against the Mark Andreessen. I mean, sort of that. No, there is we can revolt against this age of extraction. But that's a different
Well, it's a
episode.
good topic. I think part of it is to stay focused. I mean, Mandami, for example, to his credit, was focused on, how young men in New York are feeling
Yeah.
about their economic prospects and how people feel about being poorer than their parents and like having no serious chance to buy a house. So I think that kind of, as a political movement, obviously I'm speaking in the aftermath of an election, but I have thought this for a long time. It's just the very basics. It's not even a partisan thing
Yeah.
about the idea that, that being able to own a house before you're 50 years old seems like a reasonable thing for a wealthy country. We're moving a little into housing, but I think the extraction economy, frankly, is beyond tech. Tech is the
Yeah.
most extreme example of it and the most sophisticated, but we have moved into a world where we have an extractive economy and staying just focused on that one topic, I think, history suggests is more successful than um, other kind of political movements. Um, yeah, that's the second half of my book is really more about that topic, about the challenge of frankly authoritarian takeover and how you fight it by economic rebalancing.
No,
So
I read it. It's a great book, The Age of Extraction. Uh, Tim Wu, I think we're out of time here, but I mean, people will put it in the show notes where you can get it, but bookstores anywhere and all the usual places. But if you're, I found it a must read in terms of understanding exactly not just the extraction of the networks, but just sort of again the bigger picture here of the entire economy and how that's impacting us, and how we need to be aware of it in terms of its impact on with the movement of autocracy and everything else that's going on in our society. So please, people should go pick up Tim's book. And Tim, thank you so much for being with us. This podcast will always be free and is part of Lincoln Square, so check out the latest. It's lincolnsquare.media. And yes, I'm going to bring it up one more time. You can be sure to join us at sez.us. It's a civil social network for real human beings. It's part of what we're trying to, our small part of trying to take on what Tim wrote about and see if we can get something going out there. And you can always send us a message to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question in the review on iTunes. We'll see you next week. Tim, thanks so much. And people, check out his book, The Age of Extraction.
Thank you. Great to be here again.